Welcome to Counselor Confidential with Megan. Today we are talking about the Corey Micciolo case and the verdict, which is in for Christopher Gregor, who was Corey Micciolo's biological father. Let's get into it. If you clicked on this video, I'm assuming that you already understand the case of Corey Micciolo. I'm not going to get into all the details because I'm sure you already know. If you don't already know though, you can click this somewhere on here video that I did just kind of doing an overview of the case. Just understand that in that video, I did make a major mistake on the year that Corey passed away. It is 2021, not 2020, but moving on. Today, we are here to talk about the verdict. Well, two verdicts actually, three verdicts really, and I won't hold you in suspense any longer, even though you probably already know. The first verdict was a guilty verdict on the charge of child endangerment, which I think we all knew was coming. The second verdict was not guilty on the charge of and the third verdict was a guilty on the charge of aggravated manslaughter. Sentencing is not until August 2nd. Now, I'm going to spend the rest of this video talking about my thoughts, my observations, and my predictions, and also will give you some insight from an interview that I saw with Bre Micciolo, which is Corey's mother. And actually her mom, Rebecca Micciolo, was also in that interview. And I will link that in the description below. It is a really great interview. It clears up so many questions that people have had about the details of this case. And it also gives you an insight into what exactly was going on, what the prosecution got right, and what the defense got wrong. There are definitely some surprises in that interview, so I highly recommend that you go watch it as soon as you're done with this video. Now, for my personal reactions to the verdict, I was predicting that this would be the outcome. If you go back to my previous video, which I'll link up here, about the case, you will see that I did predict that Christopher Gregor would be found guilty on the child endangerment charge, and that he would probably not be found guilty of the big M word, but would be found guilty of aggravated manslaughter. Now, the reason that I had those thoughts is actually something that was confirmed by Bre Micciolo. She agrees with my line of thinking, or I guess I agree with her line of thinking since it was her son, unfortunately, who passed. But in this interview that I had just mentioned, Bre said she herself does not even think that Christopher meant to unalive Corey. She shared that she believes that it just was mistreatment that got out of hand, which is exactly what I said last week. That while I think Christopher was a not great person and was really severely mistreating Corey, I think selfishly he would never have wanted this outcome because he values his freedom and his ability to do whatever he wants more than anything else in the world. And so he knew that if he unalived Corey, that he would lose that freedom. So of course he wouldn't have intended for that to be the outcome. Obviously, unfortunately, he was unable to control his anger and his aggression, and he ended up where he's at now. In that interview with Bre, she also talked a lot about the extent to which Corey was experiencing this mistreatment with Christopher. She said also that she cleared up the custody arrangement. I always understood that the custody arrangement was that Christopher had primary physical custody and that Bre was only getting visitation. She cleared that up and said that was not true, that they were awarded 50-50 custody by a judge, and that Christopher only had Corey one more day of the week than Bre did, and that was only because of the school schedule. So I thought that was interesting too. She cleared so much up. Please just, as soon as you're done with this, go watch it. But what she was saying about the mistreatment that Corey was experiencing is that it was relentless. It was every single time that Corey went to see Christopher, and that basically it was amping up, and that what kept happening to Corey was getting so severe that he literally asked his grandma one day, "Does God see what's happening to me?" So he felt abandoned by God. He felt abandoned by everyone who was supposed to be keeping him safe. And he knew that his mom and grandma couldn't save him. I'm sure they, of course, would have if they could have, but the courts were mandating that Corey continue to go and see his father, despite the over 100 reports of mistreatment that were made by Bre. So this is just a tragedy all around. It is horrific. It is so unfortunate. I can't even allow myself to think for any significant length of time about the things that Corey must have gone through. There was also a voice recording of Corey that Bre had that had him saying exactly what happened to him. You know, it sounded awful. It sounded awful for a 6-year-old to have to go through that, and to know every week that that's what he was going to be encountering when he got to his father's house, and to know that he had no control and nothing he could do about it. Bre also mentioned in that interview that Corey, that he seemed to be accepting that his life was going to end soon and almost predicting it. We don't know if Christopher actually was ever verbally threatening that was his intention, but Corey seemed to understand that this couldn't continue much longer and without that outcome. She said that his birthday was coming up at the beginning of May, and he passed away on April 2nd. And she said she kept trying to plan a birthday party for him. He was about to turn 7, and that he wanted nothing to do with planning a party because I don't know, she didn't know at the time, but she thinks now, looking back, that it had to do with Corey knowing that he probably wasn't going to be around for that party. He also, I guess, wrote something with sidewalk chalk with Bre about not being alive anymore. And it just sounds like he was kind of giving up in a way because he felt like there was no option for him. The other thing that I want to talk about in regards to this case is something I also said in the last video, which Bre confirmed in this post-trial interview, which is that the defense can say whatever they want. They are not held to any real standards. They can make things up. Their whole job is to make their client look as good as possible and to boost him up in any way that they can. And in this case, it involved tearing Bre's reputation down and telling outright lies. If Bre is to be believed, a lot of the things that the defense lawyer was saying during his closing arguments were just flat out false, and had nothing to do with anything, or at the very least were out of order in terms of the timeline of how things went down. And the motives and things that he was assigning to Bre were absolutely outrageous. And then just going back to some of those statements that he made, you know, one of them being that Bre was just looking for her opportunity to get custody back. She had custody. She had 50-50 custody. It's not like she wasn't getting to see Corey. And the way that the lawyer, Mr. Gallucci, was explaining things, it had me believing that she, you know, didn't have custody or was only getting, you know, visitation 1 or 2 days a week. So the way that the defense was allowed to kind of spin things is upsetting. But I think the beauty of having this post-trial interview with Bre out there, and I hope she does more, is that we get to see the big picture. We get to see what was left out. And I think it's something for us to all keep in mind as we watch any trial, is there's always more to the story. There's always going to be more to the story that the jury's not going to get to hear, that's not going to be admissible in court. And, you know, from a defense perspective, I understand, right? Everyone is entitled to a fair trial. Everyone is entitled to have their day in court. And I get it, right? If I was ever on trial for something that I did not do, I would want all of those things in place so that I could have a fair trial. The problem is when somebody has so clearly committed the crime that they're on trial for, we get really frustrated, right? I mean, it's frustrating to watch something like what Mr. Gallucci did, or I've mentioned this before in another video, but like what Jose Baez did in the Casey Anthony trial. They just straight up make stuff up, and it's maddening, right? Because in some cases it works. And I think that is the danger of the system. Obviously, a lot of these rules and regulations were put in place to protect people who are innocent, but it also gives an advantage to the defense in some cases where maybe that advantage is not deserved. The final thing that I want to talk about is my predictions for sentencing. As far as I understand, and as far as what's been put out there, the maximum sentence for child endangerment based on what Christopher did is 10 years. Some people are saying it could be up to 20 years, but that seems to be only in cases of SA, more along the lines, if you're familiar with like the Madeline Soto case, more along those lines, like the SA stuff, with images and all of that, like all of those aggravating factors would be what would make it a 20-year sentence. So obviously in this case, that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about him, Mr. Gregor, physically hurting his son. So I think for that charge, hopefully he'll get the max of 10 years, unless there's some other aggravating, thing to consider. I think that's probably what he'll get. The other charge, the aggravated manslaughter, from what I understand, again, I could be wrong, from what I understand, the maximum sentence for that is 20 years. Again, I don't know how he wouldn't get the full 20 years. I mean, he was convicted, so that means the jury believes that that's what happened, and I hope that the judge gives that full sentence. Now, let's talk about the judge. A lot of people in the chats on the videos I've been watching of the trial, like on Law and Crime and Court TV, a lot of the people have been saying like, oh, this judge is favoring the defense, and this judge is running the worst, courtroom that I've ever seen, and he's too casual, and he doesn't take it seriously, and blah, 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 blah. I thought that he ran the court very well. I thought he ran it as efficiently as he could. I thought he had a lot of compassion and respect for the jury and their time. I think he had a lot of compassion and respect for just everyone involved in the trial. It seems like he takes his job very seriously and takes our legal process seriously and has respect for it. I went back and watched recently, stick with me because it's relevant, but I recently, the other day, went back and watched the sentencing for Leticia Stauch, or Stauch, or however you say that. And her, she was convicted of unaliving her stepson, Gannon Stauch. And that was a huge case that I was obsessed with last year. Very sad, horrific circumstances, unbelievable overall. But I was watching the sentencing for that just to kind of see and remember what that was like. And that judge was extremely emotional in his sentencing. Not in a way that was unprofessional at all, but the amount of thought that he put into what he wrote as he sentenced Leticia was outstanding, I thought. I thought it was incredible. I thought it's what any victim or parent of a victim would want to hear. And I think it really set a high standard for sentencing and judge statements during those hearings. So if you want to watch that, I'll also link it down below if you want a refresher on that. But that judge, I felt, really did a nice job of acknowledging all of the pain and suffering and struggle that this woman put her family through as the result of what she did to Gannon. And he really took it seriously. And my hope, I know this judge, Judge Ryan, in Corey's case, he just has a different style, he has a different demeanor. But I hope that he can kind of take a page out of that book, out of the sentencing of Leticia Stauch, because any parent who loses a child deserves to hear that the judge believes them and that the judge wants justice to fully be served for the loss of their child. So I hope that he doesn't skimp on his words towards Christopher Gregor. I really hope he goes hard on him. I hope he says some really tough things to him. And I think my only fear about that not happening is who Christopher Gregor's father is, David Gregor, that he, is this highly respected and highly decorated former state trooper. He's very chummy, allegedly, with a lot of, government officials and law enforcement. So I hope that that doesn't sway Judge Ryan. I really hope it doesn't. And I hope Judge Ryan is tough on Chris. I hope he's really hard on him in the sentencing. And I say that, out of my desire to have Corey's mom feel satisfied, but I also say that because I felt very unfinished. I felt very unsatisfied at the conclusion of the verdict the other day. There was just nothing said. There was just nothing said. It was really here's the verdict. Thank you so much to the jury. And we'll see you August 2nd for sentencing. That was it. There was nothing said to Christopher. And I don't know if that's normal. I can't recall if that's typical how it goes, but it just was very jarring to me, after all of that emotion and all of that buildup, to just be all right, great, that's the verdict. See you August 2nd. See you in a couple months. It was very unsatisfying. So I hope he makes up for that at sentencing. What do you think? Let me know in the comments.